Welcome to this Blender tutorial. In this tutorial we will look at how to render animations in Blender. For the tutorial I will be using this animation of 3 beach balls deflating and inflating. The principles in this tutorial can be applied to any animation. If you wish to follow along, links to tutorials on how to model the scene and create the animation are in the video description below. This animation uses physics within the animation. It is recommended to bake the physics animation before rendering. Baking essentially saves the animation. This allows the render to run more smoothly and less likely to have any glitches. A bake can be cleared and rebaked if changes are needed to the animation. To bake physics animations, click on the objects that have physics, then click the Bake button within the Physics Properties panel. The bake is represented by a blue line across the timeline. We will now look at the more important render and output settings. The resolution controls the resolution of the output of the animation. The default is 1920 by 1080. This can be amended, but the larger the resolution, the longer the render will take. The frame start and end determines where the animation starts and ends. Frame rate is the frames per second of the animation. As the animation initially will be rendered into a series of image files, the frame rate is not relevant at this stage. The placeholders checkbox allows you to render the animation using multiple computers. The computers need to be on the same network and have access to the blend file. When rendering animations, it is recommended to render to a series of image files. The image files can then be compiled into a movie file. A movie file can be used for rendering, but if the rendering process is stopped, it will need to be restarted from the start. When rendering to image files, the rendering can be stopped if needed and restarted from the next image. This animation will be rendered into a series of PNG image files. The image files will then be converted into a movie file. When the render process needs to be restarted part way through the process, the overwrite checkbox needs to be unchecked before restarting the render process. This will prevent images already rendered from being overwritten. The process will then continue from the last frame that is not rendered. The output location is where the render is saved. The default location can be adjusted to somewhere more convenient. We will now enable denoising. Denoising assists with removing fireflies and noise in the image. Denoising is enabled from within the Layers Properties menu. We will now look at the important rendering settings. The first setting to look at is the render engine. I will use the Cycles render engine, which is the render engine used to create the animation. The number of samples determines the quality of the render. The higher amounts of samples, the better the quality, but the render will take longer to complete. To find the best amount of samples for the final render, it's best to do a few test renders on single frames at different amounts of samples. This animation will be rendered at 500 samples, which creates a fairly good quality without taking an excessive amount of time. Tile size is the render area that Blender will process at a time. The tile size can have an impact on the time Blender takes to render, but this can be different depending on the specifications of your system. To find the optimum tile size for your system, it's best to run a few test renders at different tile sizes. Order is the order or pattern in which the tiles are rendered. The order does not affect render times. I will use top to bottom, but this is only because of personal preference. Prior to any render, you should always make sure you have saved your project. To start the rendering process, click on the Render menu. Then Render Animation. The video will now be paused until the rendering is complete. When the render is complete, the output folder will have 250 images. These images will be used to create a movie file. From the Workspace menu, open the Video Editing workspace. To add the images for the animation, click on the Add menu, then Image Sequence. Navigate to the output location where your images are saved. To select all the images, click on the first image, scroll down to the last image, and click on it while holding the Shift key. Click on the Add Image Strip button. The animation can now be previewed in the Video Sequencer window. Blender will cache the animation as it runs. The output settings will now be updated for the final render. The frame rate can be adjusted. I will use the default. The output location of the final render can be changed if needed. From within the output settings, the file format is changed to a movie format. I will use FFmpeg. When using FFmpeg, the container and codec can be selected. This animation does not have any audio, but the audio codec can also be selected when needed. Within the post-processing sub-menu, make sure the sequencer checkbox is selected. This will render the animation from the video sequencer. It's recommended to always save your project before rendering. To run the final render, click on the Render menu. Then Render Animation. The video will now be paused while the render completes. When the render is completed, a movie file with the animation will be in the output location. The movie file can then be played using your favorite video player. If you found this tutorial useful, click the like button and subscribe for more Blender and CG related tutorials.